Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad to be speaking a little bit about cities and design. So I've been thinking a lot about the work that Tom Malone is doing, thinking about this concept of superminds, thinking about collective intelligence. And for me, as an architect and a designer, what intrigues me is how this is going to impact cities and how this is going to impact our process of design. Because if you think about it, cities are actually an amalgamation of all those different kinds of superminds. It's here that we have markets. It's here that we have democratic processes. And so I'm excited to think about how technology and how computers and humans working together can really change the process of city making. And so the term that I want to use for that idea is the civic supermind. So of course, cities have a form of collective intelligence. This is nothing new. Cities are in constant synthetic evolution. We constantly try new things. If they work, we keep them as a part of our city, and cities sort of evolve over time. As Tom was just saying, humans and working together are impossibly brilliant. We can solve these incredibly complex challenges, and that's something that certainly happens in civic space. A great example of that is the Dabbawallas in Mumbai. There are about 5,000 semi-literate Dabbawallas, and every day they deliver 200,000 meals. And what's remarkable about this is that they make one mistake every 6 million trips. So what happens is someone at home puts lunch in a little tin, marks it with a combination of colors and symbols, and then a few hours later it shows up on a completely different part of Mumbai. And no one really understands how this happens. It's an incredibly complex system. And it's an example of humans working together to solve this problem of system optimization. So we're not just thinking together as a group right now, at this moment in time, like the Dabbawallas do, but we're actually kind of thinking with all of the past humans who have impacted the city, who have committed these design changes. You could think of them as mutations to the city. If I can go back quickly, this diagram shows an early idea of what that is, this idea of synthetic evolution. It's showing how, from an original stick, you have this kind of evolution of tools and technologies that serve all sorts of different processes. So this happens in architecture and design. You can see here these little sketches show vernacular architecture and how vernacular architecture has been an example of people really finding a best fit to the climate and the culture. Our spaces are designed not only to kind of get a roof over our head, but they're designed according to the resources at hand. They're designed according to our social values and our kind of sense of civics. They might reflect religion, or they might reflect the power structures in our society. And so I believe that this is an example of synthetic evolution and collective intelligence coming together to create architecture and cities. What's really interesting is that as I was exploring in this book called Open Source Architecture, co-authored with Carlo Ratti, technology is evolving faster and faster. So that process of clubs and sticks might have taken millennia, but today you can see this amazing kind of evolution of the BMW from 1975 to 2017. This is a few decades. This car is really evolving iteratively, and that process is accelerating. It's oops. Go back here. That process is accelerating. So here, the iPhone evolved over the course of only 10 years dramatically. The iPhone that we have today is really profoundly different from the one we had just 10 years ago. So technology is evolving faster. It's also spreading wider and wider. We saw Wikipedia earlier, but Linux is another example of a software platform that's built entirely collaboratively. It's built through this group working together. This diagram shows all the different sort of iterations and people who have downloaded the kernel of Linux and modified it and re-uploaded it to the system. It's pretty incredible how many people have developed this software in an entirely sort of collective way. There's no pay structure. Microsoft spent a reported maybe $15 billion to develop their operating system. This is entirely free. It's an incredible phenomenon of the modern world, of humans and computers thinking together. So I'm going to show some ideas about how that could impact cities, and in 3 different categories. The first is designers, cities, and the crowd. this idea that I call futurecraft, this idea of designers creating those mutations and then testing them in public space and allowing people to sort of give feedback and decide if that's a design mutation that we want as a part of our city. I'm also going to show DesignX, which is a program that we've started a couple years ago here at MIT. And that's an idea that designers are working in the market, specifically through entrepreneurship, design entrepreneurship. And finally, the civic supermind idea where designers are actually working with regulation. So now you guys are like, oh, it's going to be super boring. No, regulation is super interesting because it's the parameters, like a democracy, that set the possibilities for design and what we might be able to do in cities. Specifically interesting now that we have so many urban technologies like self-driving cars, like drones, things that are about to transform our public space. So futurecraft, designers, cities, and the crowd. The motivating question here is how can designers demonstrate possible urban futures? That's kind of the overarching question that we use in this book. It's called The City of Tomorrow, and we were thinking about these kind of possible futures that designers are creating and then putting out in the world. So one example of that is a project called Waterfly that I did with some colleagues at the Sensible City Lab. And the idea, as you can see here in this little diagram, is the Charles River. This is right outside MIT. Every few years, there are blooms of cyanobacteria, which make the river kind of unusable. They're not dangerous or anything, but you don't want to like swim around in a pool of cyanobacteria. But we have really poor data, so we don't really know why this is happening. Our idea here was to use drones for water quality sensing. So here's an imaging drone, here's a water probing drone, and the idea is that with a swarm of drones, they would actually share tasks. They would work together, and they would go create really high-resolution, real-time data about the water quality and about the river. So I'm going to show a quick little video, not only of the idea, but also sort of how it ended up happening in the lab. So here you see the cyanobacteria. This is a problem not only in the Charles River, but kind of all over the world. And it could theoretically be expanded to any water quality questions or territorial questions about ecological sensing. So here's the Waterfly, this little drone. The idea is that you have some that are doing imaging while others are taking water samples. And so we had this idea, we thought it was great, and because this is MIT, mind in hand, demo or die, we thought, okay, we got to build a prototype. So here it is in a gym. Those are kiddie pools filled with water. So here you see one of the drones going and taking some images. And then another one comes along. Based on the locations of those images that the first drone has identified, it goes and picks up some water samples. And all of this data is being loaded in real time. So here you can see a little sketch, and I'll show it in a minute, of how that might be communicated to the public. So this is data that's not only useful for decision makers, for water quality scientists, but also useful for people who want to go kayaking and want to know about the state of the river. So this is what we proposed right outside of MIT, this kind of data table showing the ecological sort of state of the river in real time. And through that, we imagine that the public would be able to say, this is something we really like. We really like drones giving us this real-time data. Or people might come back and say, drones are a total nuisance. We hate this. We don't want it. And I think that's an important role for designers to be putting these new ideas in the world, but really testing them with the public. So next I want to show DesignX, which is, as I mentioned before, a new program here at MIT. It's spanning across the School of Architecture and Planning, including the Media Lab here where we're sitting. And the idea, the question is, how can research projects become urban technology products? So how can designers interact with the market? At its core, this is an accelerator. It's an academic program dedicated to design innovation. where we address critical issues facing the future of design, cities, and the human environment. Very broad, but something like Waterfly would be part of it, and we have a whole host of different projects, which I'll show in a minute. The idea is that, like many accelerators, we invite students and faculty teams that have at least one member in the School of Architecture and Planning, but anyone can pitch an idea. So they pitch, they prototype, we offer mentorship, we offer seed funding, and opportunities for scale through the network. And here's an image that shows some of these different technologies, a beautifully rendered idea of kind of like all these different possibilities in our cities. So here you can see some of our teams. Prep Hub, for example, is doing infrastructure for disaster response. We have a team doing intergenerational housing, artist space and vacant storefronts, Montessori-inspired toys for computational thinking. Really a broad spectrum. I want to dive into a couple just to kind of tell their story, communicate their idea. BioBot Analytics. They are a collaboration between an urban planner and a microbiologist. The idea being that with a sewer sensor, they can create real-time data on our collective health, on the sort of microbiome of the city. And so here you can see one of their demos. That's the robot there. I don't know if I have a, oh, I do. That's the robot that's going to go down in the sewer and take water samples and process that data. This is Mariana. She's a microbiologist and working on that side of things. And they've been extraordinarily successful. This is them a couple weeks ago at South by Southwest. They won the Mayor's Challenge. So we're super proud of them, and they're off to the races. They're working with a lot of cities now. Another company is called Airworks. They're doing surveying, which is an industry that's been the same for like hundreds, if not thousands of years, using little mirrors and tripods. They're doing that with drones. So here you can see them. They're out in the field. There's their drone. And they can create incredible data. This shows you all those points of capture. And they're able to process this data and create survey-grade 3D models. And this does it hundreds of times faster and hundreds of times cheaper than traditional surveying. It's super quick, and I believe it's really going to disrupt a very old industry. So finally, I want to conclude with this idea of civics and of regulation and how this stuff actually gets deployed in cities. Because, well, we have to answer this question: why isn't there more civic innovation? Why aren't some of the technologies that we're seeing in DesignX, some of the things like autonomous cars? Why didn't you take an autonomous car to get here this morning? And so if you remember, this is the Waterfly project. This is something we proposed to be right here a couple hundred yards away. We had the working prototype, which you saw in that gymnasium. And the minute we tried to fly it outside, we got a cease and desist letter from the FAA. Because, of course, MIT is within 5 miles of an airport. We didn't have line of sight. We didn't have proper certification. We were violating like 12 different rules from the Federal Aviation Administration. And so we literally got a cease and desist letter, which is kind of a problem. I think it's inherently problematic that there are companies doing testing because they have a lot of political clout. They have a lot of finance to put behind it with drones. You also have people testing out in rural conditions, way outside of the city, where it's allowed, it's legal there. But then you can't really get a sense of that data and how the city operates. Not only get a sense of kind of the urban condition, but also get a sense of how people are going to respond. Because I think that one of the most important things about drones or self-driving cars is not the technology itself, but the social response around it. So we tried to get exemption. This is the FAA website. No joke. It's terrible. It takes a long time. It's expensive. It's kind of onerous. And it was not even clear that we would get exemption to fly over the Charles River. And I think this is emblematic of a lot of civic technologies, a lot of things that have potential to transform our cities and the way we live. So regulation gets in the way. And because regulation gets in the way, there are very few incentives to innovate. So if it's unclear whether you can get a patent in the future, if it's unclear whether your market will exist or you're going to get shut down, you have other pathways to scale. You might do the Uber kind of method and scale first and deal with the law later. not desirable in many cases. Or you might just design for the private sector. We might have taken our drone and commercialized it in another country. We might have just created a toy for enthusiasts. But none of these are really allowing the technology to impact cities. And so I believe that the solution is place. And this is something I'm working with with DesignX, of course, and with some colleagues around the world to think about how place can actually enable this sort of technological testing. So if you imagine an experimental block like this, ordinarily you have this outdated and inflexible regulation. So if you have your urban technology, it gets impeded. But you can imagine a world where, according to some baseline data, you understand what's happening there right now. You understand the patterns of use. You understand things like energy, things like climate. You can grant a regulatory exemption. And so this is kind of a parametric idea where you say, OK, we're going to allow a drone to fly if it satisfies certain criteria, both in terms of its test and its subsequent sort of operation. So then you deploy your drone. And over the course of that experiment, you can actually use the baseline data to iterate the regulation itself. So we might say, oh, we found out those drones don't need to go beneath 20 or 30 feet, so we're not going to do that. And now we're going to write a law that says drones must operate above 20 or 30 feet, for example. You can also iterate the technology. So over the course of this test, you can make the drone perform better. You might find ways of making it quieter if that's something that people are really concerned about. You can kind of use this as an opportunity to improve. And that improvement has real value for the technologist. They're creating their market, in a sense. They're making their technology better. And so I think we need to appropriate the value of testing. Because if you're contemplating developing a civic technology, that hurdle of having a test is really the make or break. Those value loops also exist for government. You might imagine smart contracts. You might imagine data-driven procurement. So the government welcomes tests. It might welcome tests from multiple providers and say, whichever one performs the best, we commit to purchasing a service. It could actually be a sort of smart contract where the government allows testing with certain technologies and says, because you have the opportunity to test, which, as I just mentioned, has entrepreneurial value, they might have to offer a diminished rate on the service to the government, for example. So we're really seeing value emerge for both sides of the equation. And I believe that over time, this is actually kind of an ongoing cyclical loop. So as this block sort of comes online and welcomes more and more technologies, as the regulations become more and more flexible, more and more iterative, you see this starting to sort of feed back on itself and really transform our civic experience, but also transform government. And of course, creating more and more data the whole time. So you can begin to replicate the successful technologies across the city. You can also replicate this block to other parts of the city. You can integrate those technologies and have them really transform the operation of the city and the experience of the city. And you can scale. So what works in Boston is not going to be exactly the same as what's going to work in Helsinki. But a good technology in Boston should definitely be tested and deployed and maybe tweaked a little bit in Helsinki. And I believe that as we start to think about this in different cities around the world, we can really form what Tom was describing as that global supermind. That the brilliant ideas that emerge from Mumbai, the Dabbawalas, maybe that can help us deliver packages from Amazon retail purchases here in Boston. And I believe that we need to develop those opportunities to not only grow technology that's locally attuned, locally specific, but also share it and give it an opportunity to scale, give it incentives to entrepreneurship. So in summary, I think we need to empower the collective intelligence of citizens, researchers, and designers to advance that synthetic evolution of urban technology for our cities. Thank you very much.